wife suspected her husband of cheating. But the next week, he disappeared. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The first time I noticed something was wrong, David was standing in our kitchen at 11:47 p.m., still in his work clothes, explaining why he was 3 hours late. Again. The presentation ran over, he said, loosening his tie without meeting my eyes. You know how Peterson gets when the quarterly numbers don't look right. I nodded, stirring my cold coffee, but something felt off. David worked in accounting. I'd been to enough office parties to know Peterson from HR, and he was about as intense as vanilla pudding. More importantly, David smelled like vanilla and jasmine, a perfume I'd never worn. I saved you dinner, I said, testing. Thanks, babe, but I grabbed something with the team. He kissed the top of my head, the same distracted peck he'd been giving me for weeks. I'm exhausted, going to shower and hit the hay. I listened to the water running upstairs and stared at the untouched plate of lasagna. 3 months ago, David would have devoured it cold, standing right here at the counter, telling me about his day between bites. 3 months ago, he would have pulled me close and danced badly to whatever song was stuck in his head. 3 months ago, my husband still looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. Now, he looked at me like I was furniture. The second sign came on a Thursday. I was loading the dishwasher when his phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a text from M that read, "Can't wait for Saturday. Same place?" My hands froze on the plates. David was upstairs getting dressed for work, humming some tune I didn't recognize. Saturday was our 7-year anniversary. We'd made reservations at Chez Laurent weeks ago. When he came downstairs, coffee travel mug in hand, I was holding his phone. You got a text, I said, studying his face. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe guilt, before his expression smoothed into casual concern. Probably work, thanks. He took the phone without looking at it, kissed my cheek, and headed for the door. Who's M? The question escaped before I could stop it. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. M. The text, from M. Oh! He laughed, but it sounded forced. Marcus, from IT. He's always sending random stuff. He checked his watch. Shoot, I'm going to be late. Love you. The door closed behind him with unusual finality, and I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the smell of fresh coffee and the lingering scent of his cologne, feeling like a stranger in my own life. That evening, I did something I'd never done in 7 years of marriage. I looked through his phone. David was in the shower again, his second of the day, and his phone sat charging on our nightstand. My hands shook as I entered his passcode, our anniversary date. It worked on the first try, which somehow made me feel worse. The messages with M went back weeks. They were carefully worded, nothing explicitly romantic, but the undertone was unmistakable. M. Had such a good time yesterday. You're different when you're relaxed. David. You make me remember who I used to be. M. Can you get away Sunday? I have something to show you. David. I'll figure it out. I always do. My chest tightened as I scrolled through dozens of messages, each one feeling like a small betrayal. The shower was still running, so I checked his call log. Multiple calls to and from M, at odd hours, early morning, late evening, even during lunch breaks when David usually called me. I quickly deleted my search history and put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, but the damage was done. The evidence was mounting, and I couldn't unknow what I now knew. The confrontation happened on Friday night. David came home at 9 p.m. with Chinese takeout and an easy smile, as if the last few weeks of distance and lies hadn't happened. Thought we'd have a quiet night in, he said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. Just us. Just us, I repeated, like old times. Exactly. He handed me chopsticks and settled beside me on the couch. I know I've been distracted lately. Work's been crazy, but things should calm down soon. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But when he reached for the remote, I saw it. A small red mark on his collar that definitely wasn't there when he left this morning. What's that? I pointed to the mark. David glanced down, and I watched his face change. The easy smile faltered, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Panic, quickly masked by confusion. What's what? The lipstick, on your collar. He looked again, and I saw the moment he spotted it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I have no idea. Maybe from the dry cleaner? Sometimes they... It's fresh, David. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, he set down his chopsticks and turned to face me fully. Sarah, I know how this looks, but... How long? My voice was steadier than I felt. How long what? How long have you been seeing her? I'm not seeing anyone. His denial came too quickly, too practiced. Sarah, you're being paranoid. Am I? Then who is M? And don't say Marcus from IT, because I know Marcus, and he's 63 years old with a wife named Helen and 3 grandkids. David's face went pale. You went through my phone. You gave me a reason to. I never... He stopped, ran his hands through his hair. This is insane. You're acting crazy. The word hit me like a slap. Crazy? I'm crazy for noticing that my husband comes home smelling like another woman's perfume? For wondering why he's suddenly working late every night? For asking questions when he gets mysterious texts about secret meetings? They're not secret meetings. They're... He stopped abruptly. They're what, David? What are they? But he was already standing, grabbing his jacket from the chair. I can't do this right now. I need some air. Don't you dare walk away from me. We're not done talking about this. Yes, we are. He was at the door, keys in hand. I'll be back later. Maybe by then you'll have calmed down. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with cold Chinese food and the crushing weight of my suspicions. I called his phone 6 times over the next 3 hours. It went straight to voicemail every time. He didn't come home that night. Or the next. By Sunday evening, I was alternating between rage and worry in nauseating waves. Part of me wanted to change the locks, pack his things, and be done with it. But a larger part, the part that still loved the man I'd married, was terrified something had happened to him. I called his office Monday morning. His assistant, Janet, seemed genuinely surprised. Oh, Mrs. Chen, I thought you knew. David called in sick. Said he had that flu that's been going around. When did he call? This morning, around 8. He sounded awful, poor thing. Said he might be out all week. I hung up and stared at my phone. David wasn't sick. David was somewhere with M, probably laughing about his crazy, paranoid wife. Tuesday brought more lies. Another call to Janet revealed David had called in again, this time claiming a family emergency. When I asked what kind of emergency, she seemed confused. He didn't say, just that it was urgent, and he'd be in touch when he could. Is everything all right, Mrs. Chen? You sound upset. I wasn't just upset. I was losing my mind. Wednesday, I did something desperate. I drove to David's office building and waited in the parking lot from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. He never showed up. I called his desk phone from my car and listened to it ring and ring in his empty office. That night, I broke down and called his mother. Margaret, it's Sarah. I was wondering if you'd heard from David recently. David? No, sweetie, not for a couple weeks. Why? Is everything all right? I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Oh, just checking. He's been working so much lately, I thought he might have mentioned it. That boy works too hard, she ticked. You make sure he's taking care of himself. After I hung up, I sat in our living room, my living room now, apparently, and tried to make sense of what was happening. David was lying to everyone, me, his work, his family. He was somewhere, with someone, living a completely separate life. Thursday morning, I called the police. Officer Rodriguez was kind, but not particularly helpful. Adults have the right to disappear, ma'am, unless there's evidence of foul play. He's been acting strange for weeks, lying about where he's been, who he's with. I understand this is difficult, but marital problems aren't typically police matters. Has he threatened you? Are you in any danger? No, but has he taken money from joint accounts? Charged unusual amounts on credit cards? I hadn't thought to check. I don't know. I'd suggest starting there. If there's financial fraud, or if you genuinely believe he's in danger, not just avoiding you, then we can file a missing person report. After the officer left, I spread our financial statements across the dining room table. What I found there made my blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, David had been withdrawing large amounts of cash from our savings. $3,000 here, $5,000 there, always in odd amounts that didn't correspond to any bills or expenses I knew about. Our savings account, which should have had nearly $30,000, was down to $4,000. More disturbing were the credit card charges. Hotels I'd never been to. Restaurants in parts of the city I'd never visited. Gas stations along highways that led away from our town. And strangest of all, several large payments to something called Sunset Financial Services, a company I'd never heard of. I called the credit card company and learned that Sunset Financial Services was a debt consolidation agency. David owed them money, a lot of money. Friday evening, I was sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by financial documents, and trying to piece together my husband's secret life, when someone knocked on the door. The man standing on my porch was tall, thin, and wearing an expensive suit that somehow managed to look threatening. He smiled when I opened the door, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Chen? I'm looking for your husband. Is David available?" "He's not here. Who are you?" "A friend. When do you expect him back?" Something in his tone made my skin crawl. "I'm sorry, but I don't give out information about my husband's schedule to strangers." The smile faded slightly. "Mrs. Chen, it's important that I speak with David. He's been difficult to reach lately." "I don't know where he is." "You don't know where your own husband is?" The question hung in the air like a threat. I started to close the door, but the man put his hand against it. "Mrs. Chen, your husband owes some people money. Quite a bit of money. They're not the kind of people who like to wait." My mouth went dry. "I think you should leave. I think you should have your husband call Vincent Torino tonight." He handed me a business card. "For both your sakes." After he left, I locked every door and window in the house, then called Officer Rodriguez. He took my statement, but didn't seem overly concerned. "Could be a scam, Mrs. Chen. These debt collection agencies sometimes use intimidation tactics, but given what you've told me about your husband's behavior and the financial irregularities, I think we have enough to file a missing person report." Saturday was supposed to be our anniversary. Instead, I spent it at the police station, filling out forms and answering questions about David's habits, friends, and recent behavior. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Amy Foster, was more thorough than Officer Rodriguez had been. "Tell me about these text messages from M," she said, reading through my statement. I thought it was another woman. The messages seemed intimate. "But you never saw them together? Never confirmed who M was?" "No, I was so sure it was an affair, I didn't dig deeper." Detective Foster made notes in her file. "What about his work situation? Any problems there you're aware of?" "None. He's worked at Coleman Associates for 5 years. Never had any issues that he mentioned. We'll need to speak with his employer, get his employment records, and we'll want to trace these financial transactions, see where the money was going." As I drove home that evening, I realized I was no longer worried about David having an affair. I was worried he might be dead. Sunday morning, Detective Foster called with disturbing news. "Mrs. Chen, we spoke with your husband's employer. David hasn't worked there in 3 months. I nearly dropped the phone. "That's impossible. He went to work every day. He talked about his projects, his co-workers." According to Coleman Associates, David was terminated in February for falsifying expense reports. They had evidence he was embezzling money from client accounts. The room spun around me. No, that's not right. David would never. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen. I know this is difficult. But we need to consider that your husband may have been involved in activities that put him in danger. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was a lie. For 3 months, David had been leaving the house each morning, pretending to go to a job he'd lost, spending money we didn't have on God knows what. Monday brought more revelations. Detective Foster called to report that the mysterious M from David's phone was actually Michael Torino Vincent's brother, and according to police records, a known associate of several organized crime families in the area. It looks like your husband got involved with some dangerous people, Mrs. Chen. The debt consolidation payments were actually going to loan sharks. He owed them over $60,000. $60,000? I felt sick. How is that possible? Gambling debts, most likely. These organizations charge exorbitant interest rates. A small debt can balloon quickly. That afternoon, Vincent Torino called me directly. Mrs. Chen, we need to talk. I already told your associate, I don't know where David is. I believe you, but you need to understand the situation you're in. Your husband borrowed money from us. A lot of money. When someone skips town without paying what they owe. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. David made promises he didn't keep. Someone needs to pay for that. I'm not responsible for his debts. Aren't you? You lived in the house he paid for with our money. You wore clothes he bought with cash he borrowed from us. You ate food he put on the table with money that wasn't his. The line went dead, and I realized with crystal clarity that I was in serious danger. Tuesday night, someone broke into my house. I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of drawers being opened and closed downstairs. My first instinct was to call the police, but something made me hesitate. Instead, I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Not here either, a voice whispered. Keep looking. Torino wants those documents. What if she doesn't have them? Then we make her tell us where they are. I held my breath as footsteps moved through my living room, kitchen, David's home office. They were searching for something specific, and I had no idea what. After what felt like hours, I heard the front door close softly. I waited another 30 minutes before calling Detective Foster. Mrs. Chen, you can't stay there. These people are dangerous, and they clearly think you have something they want. But I don't. I don't know anything about David's business with them. Maybe not consciously, but think, did David ever give you anything to hold on to? Documents, flash drives, safe deposit box keys? I racked my brain but came up empty. Nothing, I swear. All right, we're going to put you up in a safe house until we can locate your husband or resolve this situation. Pack a bag. Officer Martinez will pick you up in an hour. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, I found myself crying for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not for David. I wasn't sure I'd ever forgive him for what he'd put me through, but for the life I'd lost. The marriage I'd thought was real. The future I'd planned that would never happen. The safe house was a small apartment across town, staffed by 2 officers who worked in shifts. Detective Foster visited daily with updates, none of them good. We've traced some of David's movements, she told me Wednesday afternoon. Credit card charges show he was in Atlantic City 2 weeks ago, then Philadelphia, then nothing. It's like he vanished. Maybe he left the country. Maybe. But people like Torino have long reaches. If David owes them money, geography won't protect him forever. Thursday brought the break in the case I'd been hoping for and dreading. Detective Foster arrived at the safe house with a grim expression and a manila folder. Sarah, I need you to sit down. We found David. My heart stopped. Is he alive? Yes, he's alive. She opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. He's in federal custody. The photos showed David in handcuffs, being led from a hotel by FBI agents. He looked older, thinner, haunted, but alive. Federal custody? For what? Money laundering, fraud, racketeering. It turns out your husband wasn't just gambling away money, Sarah. He was laundering it. The Torino family was using him to clean cash through his accounting skills. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile this criminal with the man who used to bring me coffee in bed every morning. I don't understand. David's not. He's not that kind of person. According to the FBI, it started small. David was in debt from some bad investments, tried to make quick money gambling, got in deeper. The Torinos offered him a way out, use his position at Coleman Associates to move their money through legitimate-looking transactions. When his employer got suspicious and fired him, David panicked. He'd been skimming money to pay his gambling debts, but now he owed the Torinos and had no way to pay them back. So he ran. He ran, but not before stealing client funds from Coleman Associates and taking money from your joint accounts. The FBI has been tracking him for weeks. I felt numb. Where did they find him? Boston. He was trying to buy fake documents, probably planning to leave the country. Detective Foster closed the folder. Sarah, there's something else. The FBI wants to talk to you. They need to determine how much you knew about David's activities. The federal building downtown felt like another planet after days in the safe house. Agent Patricia Williams was professional, but not unkind as she led me through hours of questioning. Mrs. Chen, your husband moved over $200,000 through various accounts in the past year. None of that raised red flags for you? I trusted him with our finances. He handled all the investments, the savings accounts. I just paid the household bills. You never noticed large deposits or withdrawals? Not until last week when I looked at the statements. That's when I found the cash withdrawals and the payments to Sunset Financial. Agent Williams made notes in her file. What about visitors to your home? Phone calls at odd hours? Any indication your husband was involved with criminal associates? Nothing, if I'd known. I stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of David's deception. I thought he was having an affair. That seemed like the worst possible thing he could be doing. Mrs. Chen, I want you to understand something. Your husband was in serious trouble. The Torino organization doesn't forgive debts or betrayals. David didn't just run away from his marriage, he was running for his life. When the questioning finally ended, Agent Williams walked me to the lobby. What happens now? I asked. David will likely plead guilty in exchange for cooperation against the Torinos. He's looking at significant prison time, but he'll be alive. As for you, she paused. The FBI doesn't believe you were involved in your husband's criminal activities. However, the Torinos may not make that distinction. We recommend you consider relocating, at least temporarily. I stepped out of the federal building into bright afternoon sunshine, feeling like I'd been living underground for weeks. In a way, I had been. Everything I'd thought I knew about my life had been a carefully constructed lie. That evening, back in the safe house, I finally allowed myself to grieve. Not for David, the man I'd married apparently never existed, but for Sarah Chen, the woman who'd believed in love and trust and the possibility of happily ever after. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom and watched my husband plead guilty to charges that would send him to federal prison for 8 to 12 years. He looked across the courtroom at me once, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: shame, regret, and something that might have been love. But it was too late for all of that. The divorce papers were filed the next day. I sold our house, used the proceeds to pay back what I could of the money David had stolen, and moved to Oregon to stay with my sister while I figured out how to rebuild my life from scratch. 6 months later, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from David, postmarked from federal prison in Pennsylvania. Sarah, it began, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I don't expect it, but I need you to know that everything I did to protect you. I know that sounds insane given how things turned out, but it's true. When I first got involved with the Torinos, I thought I could handle it. I thought I was smart enough to play their game and win. By the time I realized I was in over my head, they had enough on me to send me to prison, and enough leverage to hurt you if I didn't cooperate. I know you think I was having an affair. Part of me wishes I had been. It would be easier for you to hate me for that than for what I actually did. But there was never another woman, Sarah. There was only you and my desperate, stupid attempts to keep you safe from the mess I'd made. The man you married, he was real. He loved you more than anything in the world. Maybe that's why he made such terrible choices when he thought he might lose you. I hope someday you can remember the good parts of us and forget the rest. David. I read the letter twice, then burned it in my sister's fireplace. Maybe David believed what he'd written. Maybe he'd even convinced himself it was true. But I knew better now. People don't protect the ones they love by lying to them, stealing from them, and putting them in danger. David had made his choices, and I was making mine. A year later, I started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and casual dinners with kind men who seemed to say what they meant and mean what they said. It was harder than I'd expected, trusting someone after being so thoroughly deceived, but I was determined not to let David's betrayal define the rest of my life. Sometimes, late at night in my small apartment in Portland, I wondered about the woman I'd been before all this happened. The woman who believed her husband when he said he was working late. The woman who saw lipstick on a collar and worried about affairs instead of federal crimes. She seemed naive now, almost foolishly trusting. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe the ability to trust, to love without constant suspicion, was something worth protecting. I never found out exactly what happened to the Torino brothers, but Detective Foster told me they were eventually indicted on multiple federal charges. Vincent got 25 years. Michael got 15. David served 6 years of his sentence before being released on parole. I heard about it through my lawyer, who'd received notification as part of the divorce settlement. I felt nothing when I got the news. Not anger, not relief, nothing. David Chen had become a stranger to me long before he was sent to prison. 2 months after his release, I got another letter. This one was shorter. Sarah, I'm out now, starting over in a new city with a new job. I won't try to contact you again after this, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become the kind of man who deserves the love you gave me. I know it's too late for us. I know I destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable, but maybe the fact that we had it at all means something. I hope you're happy. You deserve happiness more than anyone I've ever known. David. This letter I didn't burn. I put it in a box with our wedding photos and a few other mementos from our life together, then stored the box in my closet. Not because I wanted to remember David, but because I wanted to remember Sarah, the woman I'd been when I thought love was enough to protect you from the world. She was wrong about that, but she wasn't wrong about everything. Love might not be protection, but it was still worth the risk. The key was choosing more carefully who to trust with it. 3 years after the divorce was finalized, I remarried. My new husband, James, is a teacher who coaches Little League on weekends and has never made a bet larger than a $1 lottery ticket. He tells me about his day over dinner and means it when he says he'll be home by 6. It's a quiet life, perhaps boring by some standards, but there's something beautiful about boring when you've lived through excitement of the wrong kind. There's peace in predictability, comfort in transparency. Sometimes James asks about my first marriage, and I tell him the basics. My ex-husband got involved with criminals and went to prison. I don't mention the months of suspicion, the surveillance, the terror of being hunted by loan sharks. I don't talk about how it feels to discover that your entire life was built on lies. Some stories are too heavy to carry into a new relationship. Some truths are better left buried. But late at night, when James is sleeping beside me, and I'm listening to the familiar sounds of our life together, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway clock, the soft whisper of his breathing, I sometimes think about that other woman I used to be. She thought she was married to an accountant who worked late and might be having an affair. She had no idea she was actually married to a money launderer who was running for his life from the mob. In the end, We were both right about one thing. David was living a double life. We were just wrong about which life was the lie. The woman I am now knows the difference. She checks financial statements and asks direct questions and doesn't mistake secrecy for romance. She's learned that trust isn't the same as naivety, and that love without honesty is just another form of betrayal. David taught me that the people we love are capable of destroying us with the same hands that once held us. It was the most painful lesson I've ever learned, and the most valuable, because now I know the difference between a man who's working late and a man who's lying, between someone who's protecting you and someone who's protecting himself, between love that asks you to trust blindly and love that earns your trust every day. The woman I used to be thought the worst thing that could happen was discovering her husband was cheating. The woman I am now knows there are much worse things than infidelity, like discovering that the person you built your life around never existed at all.